Welcome very, very much to Conversation. A pleasure to welcome to the program CJ Fearnley, of course. Yeah, CJ Fearnley. He's a gentleman I've been wanting to catch up with for about 15 years now, because you've been a person who've been writing mightily in fields very similar to the ones that I was very interested in, including not the least of which was the work of our Buckminster Fuller, and also in the realm of what is called Synergetics and so forth. He's got an incredible bio. He's worked in many, many fields. He was a pioneer in the Linux movement, and he's a cyberneticist, and he's the president and CEO of the LinuxForce Inc. He's also executive director of a Synergetics collaborative, and he's co-organizer of the Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society. He's an intellectual, and he's interested, and he has an amazing amount of information that he's familiar with. And CJ, thank you so very much for coming in. It's a great pleasure.
Thank you for the invitation.
No, it's my pleasure. I was so happy to see you at the recent challenge of the Buckminster Fuller Institute, where they announced that major award. That is that groundbreaking award that they announced at that event out in Brooklyn. Yeah.
Kate Orff's amazing work with the Living Breakwaters project.
Yeah.
I was just so impressed with this year's winning and challenge.
It was taking serious inroads, if that's the right way, of thinking, of synergistic thinking or visionary thinking into the established system by which the larger planet and the systems work, because it's tapping in not only to the state level and also the national level in terms of something that's confronting us all, global warming and the Breakwater Project and so forth. So they're really tapping into a major role in terms of helping to shape the Earth in a good design, right?
The oysters, building the oyster population. Maybe we can eat oysters again. Wouldn't that be amazing?
Yeah, that would be something.
And tying it in with the education, so that the communication and so the. Kate Orff is one of the best winners they've had. Yeah. I've been to almost every one of the Buckminster Fuller Challenge ceremonies. I missed one or two, but this was one of the best. It was a really great program last Thursday.
Yeah, and that was on the 20th, of November, and and I felt the same, that it's qualitatively different than a lot of the other things that have been proposed, where there's a great deal of intellectual thinking about why don't we make things just, and and that kind of thinking, idealistic thinking, I think is what it is. We're talking about Buckminster Fuller's contributions. He could be seen in some circles as idealistic, as could many of the great thinkers out of human history, idealism. But idealism writ in a way that now can tap into the practical reality is something that I think is called for now, a new understanding of how we relate to historical patterns. Yeah.
One of the important things I think that comes from idealism is preparing the world for future ideas and future thoughts. In many ways, Buckminster Fuller was a new former. He called himself that in his last book, Cosmographia, a new former. And one of the things we need is the imagination to prototype the new form, so that then 20, 30, 50, 60, 100 years later, someone can implement it and make it work.
Well, yes, except that then in a certain sense, that's all part of an evolutionary pattern. At some point, we cannot be having the luxury of putting it out 30 or 40 or 60 or 100 or 1,000 years into the future, as they might have at the time of Jesus or something like that. But the time has come for a major qualitative transformation in these very days, possibly. In the contemporary moment is not one of a continuation of history, but we're having a moment of break with the historical pattern that we have to be relating to in real terms, in a sense. That's what I'm getting at, in a certain sense.
Yeah, and I know Fuller talked about that.
Yeah.
He talked about the history's final exam. But I wonder if maybe we misunderstand that. Maybe what Fuller meant by the final exam, he also wrote somewhere else that humans are born problem solvers. And if you get any good at it, then you get harder problems to solve.
That's true, yeah.
So it may be that the final exam is just a prelude to the final exam.
Well, that could be, and that maybe brings us around because you're part of a thing called the Synergetic Collaborative. And Synergetics, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Fuller he was very, very inventive. He invented all kinds of, and he believed in ephemeralization, doing more with less through good design. He inveigled people not to be interested in political, but to design alternatives that could make the good emerge through good design, and so forth. But he also would talk to a group of people. You've studied him well. You read both of his big volumes of Synergetics and so on. But he would talk to a class or a group, 1,000 people or something, and say, "Have any of you ever heard the word synergy?" No hands would go up, hardly. Then, but now synergy is on the lips of every ad agency, and essentially its definition is the behavior of systems unpredicted by the sum of its parts. That's a big word and a big concept, and apparently you agree with that. You've got the Synergetics Collaborative. Maybe we could talk a little bit about that word and its meaning.
Unpredicted by the behavior of its components considered separately.
Yeah, is that part of it? Yeah, and I would add, in a certain sense, maximally engaged. I mean, that's another twist. That maybe we can put twists on it, but it's essentially what it does rule out, if I may. Okay, it rules out almost any absolutism. Yeah. You don't have anything absolute because it's an ongoing synergistic evolutionary process of qualitative transformation all up the line of evolutionary development itself, no?
Yeah. So Synergetics, as Buckminster Fuller developed it, is sort of a science of synergy. If synergy is the behavior of whole systems unpredicted by the behavior of the parts, can we make a science of that? Can we develop that as a way of understanding, a way of knowing? And he wrote the 2 volumes, Synergetics. And what the Synergetics Collaborative does is we're a 501c3 nonprofit, and we build on Fuller's ideas of synergetics and design science, comprehensive anticipatory design science. And we organize events to get people together. Joe Clinton, one of our founding board members, told me that when Fuller was alive, people would get together in his office, and they would meet in his office waiting to meet with Bucky.
Yeah.
And after Bucky died in 1983, there wasn't that opportunity. But with the Synergetics Collaborative, we have these events, and we get people interested in Bucky talking together, collaborating, working together, seeing what are you doing, what am I doing, and that was a real gap in the Fuller community that we've been trying to fill.
Good for you. It should be done, and there should be more and more. I think he's taking. There's more and more people, as they say in the vernacular, cottoning on to the man as being relevant to things and everything. And all of that said, that we can come back to that. And we got a clip we're going to show, which has to do with some of the synergetic aspects of design and so forth. But I wonder, maybe we should share your own background, where you were born and raised, and you've had an education, you've done a great deal of work in mathematics and so forth. So share your own background, if you would, please. Born and raised and educated a little bit, and then we'll get back to this.
I was born a Trojan, Troy, New York.
Trojan, yeah.
And grew up in upstate New York, Albany, Troy area.
Yes.
Then I went to college at SUNY Binghamton. They now call it Binghamton University.
Yeah.
And I majored in mathematics and philosophy.
Yes, indeed.
Although I spent my junior and senior year in the library studying reading every book I could on Fuller, and every journal article talking about Fuller.
Yeah.
I went to class, but I stopped studying anything but Fuller.
Yeah, I know. Now, let's back up a little bit. So you're in mathematics and philosophy. Well, what about the family setting? Was that encouraging of that? You're very much of what would be called an autodidact. You've been educating yourself. I really respect that mightily. I think it's going to emerge more and more that people will be educating themselves like a hound dog on the scent of a fox. They're running a thing down because they're really interested, not because they're fulfilling some behavioral psychology notion of what somebody else thinks they ought to be doing in order to qualify to have a certificate that lets them make some money or something like that motivates so much of the educational process. And I respect that. But how did you happen to come in touch with or discover this fellow, Buckminster Fuller?
Right. So I really enjoyed my high school geometry class.
You
that
did?
really appealed to me. And I was in a bookstore one day. I liked books. And there's a book, and the subtitle is Explorations in the Geometry of Thinking.
Where is that book? I know it. I know the subtitle. I can't remember the title.
The title is Synergetics.
Oh, that is Synergetics.
That is Synergetics.
Applewhite?
Applewhite was the adjuvant,
the
helper,
right.
That allowed. He worked with Fuller and made. He confronted Fuller with himself to help build that work and get it written. Fuller had several prior collaborators, and they couldn't get the job done. But Ed Applewhite had a particular talent of being able to confront Bucky with himself, so that he could then write out his thinking. And he got it down. And the geometry of thinking, it just absolutely appealed to me. I had this philosophical sense. I had this geometry sense. And but I found the book very difficult going. It was a real struggle. And so I said, I know what I'll do. I'll go to college, I'll major in mathematics, and then I'll read it. So after I got my bachelor's degree, I started really working on Synergetics, and I found the mathematics training I had was absolutely useless.
Really?
Didn't help
really,
a whit.
Really interesting.
It helped a little.
You did that? You did the calculus and stuff?
Yeah. You don't need any calculus to understand Synergetics.
Okay, but what does that say about calculus? Or what does that say about the historical tradition of mathematics, for instance? You're sort of, in a certain sense, you know what I'm saying?
Well, you know, I'm going back and I'm reviewing my
that's
mathematics.
fair enough. Yeah,
and
but you got an incredible array of work you've done in mathematics. You've covered the whole waterfront as far as that's concerned. So you know what you talk. Yeah.
But Synergetics doesn't require any strong mathematics background to understand. I wrote an essay in 1991 that was published in the bulletin of the Buckminster Fuller Institute, Trim Tab.
Trim Tab's great.
And it's an essay about how to read Synergetics. And what I suggest in that article is that you should build the models.
Modeling,
Yeah, you don't need any mathematics training. You know, maybe a little bit of Pythagorean theorem, maybe. Very little, minimal mathematics. That's all you need. High school geometry at most.
Really?
Just build the models. So my library is filled with geometry models that I build. Until you get your hands on it, you start making a tetrahedron and an octahedron, an icosahedron.
We're going to have to talk a little bit about what that is. Those are very forms of synergetic.
You can't understand them until you build them. If I had thought to bring a model, it wouldn't have helped a whit. You know, how could you learn it until you build it yourself?
I wonder if we could talk. What is a tetrahedron? What is that? Maybe you could talk a little bit about that. And don't we have a clip that we're going to show of somebody that was at a Rensselaer Institute?
Rhode Island. Rhode Island School of Design, RISD. The Synergetics Collaborative for the past 7 years has been organizing biennial symposia on design science at the Rhode Island School of Design. They've been our major educational partner for building Bucky's work.
Interesting, they're in Rhode Island.
They're in Providence, Rhode Island. And the clip is one of the Rhode Island students, Nick Tomlin. This is on our YouTube channel, and I wanted to show it and share it because it shows the kind of naivete and serendipity that is the only prerequisite to understanding synergetics.
That's the only thing, is to be naive, right?
That's all you need.
Yeah, really.
You don't need a mathematics degree. It didn't help me. It hurt me, probably.
Really?
I had to do more unlearning.
That's really, how much unlearning does humanity have to do about the canon, it's so-called political or economic thinking that informs our institutional structures? I think there's a lot of unlearning or subsuming of historically outdated institutional assumptions. Don't you? I think we need a new vision. Yeah.
I think the Bucky community needs to unlearn some things too.
Possibly.
Some of us have taken too much Bucky too far.
Yeah, right.
And I think everyone needs to unlearn. I'm reading a book. I'm going to lead a discussion in Philadelphia on Sunday, November 30th. On ignorance.
Okay.
Stuart Firestein, a professor at Columbia, has written this book on ignorance. And he suggests that knowledge is a big subject.
It sure is.
But ignorance is bigger.
That's interesting. And vast amounts of space to fill. Yeah, right.
Firestein adds, ignorance is more interesting.
Really?
Yeah, more interesting, because once you know something, all that does is provide the framework upon which to build more ignorance.
To build more, or to apply, or to throw back the, how about taking another tack and saying you're pulling back the veil of ignorance that has been surrounding it, and are we making progress in terms of understanding the application of things in universe or not? I think maybe a case can be made for that through the evolutionary process, perhaps. Huh?
Yeah, I think it's very much tied up in a paradox.
Okay.
I think knowledge and ignorance go hand in hand. I don't think you can have one without the other.
That's interesting.
And as you learn more, it grows both your knowledge and your ignorance.
Well, how do we deal with that kind of thing? There's tensegrity, the idea of tensegrity. There's tension and compression. These two things are part of the order that they've discovered. That's another important concept, is it not? And that's got a duality to it. It's got compression, and then it's got tensional integrity that goes through, almost like parallel, almost horizontal. Or vertical.
Perpendicular.
More vertical, and the other's more inclusive and rounded and so forth. But tensegrity is part of the synergistic way of seeing universe, perhaps, right?
Tension, compression, knowledge, ignorance, right, left.
Yeah, all the dialectic, right?
Fuller has that great model, we don't walk, when you're walking, you walk right foot, left foot, right foot, left foot. You don't walk both feet, that's hopping.
Right.
So Tom Miller, who lives here in Manhattan, he's a remarkable synergeticist. He has a wonderful expression. He calls it the both neither.
Both neither.
Both neither.
Something more than the sum of either.
There are a lot of phenomena in universe, and I think knowledge and ignorance is one of them, where it's both neither. You can't really ferret out the knowledge and cordon it off and put it into a 7-pound textbook. And
people do try to do that in their own specialized field. And that's another issue about high specialization that's going on in the educational process that is just, some people are saying it's just dividing and conquering the intellectual community into highly specialized little corners where they can't get a picture of the whole, pattern recognizing, which is really important. No?
And it takes out the mystery.
Yeah.
Where's the excitement?
Right.
Where's the, learning is exciting because you don't know something and you're trying to find out.
And discovery,
Discovery, uncovering.
Pulling back the veil.
Yeah,
right, that kind of thing.
So Synergetics, this clip with Nick Tomlin, it really shows how a naive student, and I mean that in the most honorable and noble and loving way.
Naive is a great quality. I think 5-year-olds are my favorite people. They're very naive and dead honest. They have no artifice at all, hardly. Every 5-year-old, almost. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
They're just a dead honest. He says, I think they're all geniuses, and we de-geniusize them through the educational process. Mr. Fuller said something along those lines, I think.
Indeed.
We could take a model from the 5-year-olds, I think.
That's why we need so much unlearning.
Yes, right.
I take a lot of online classes.
Yeah, I know.
And
you're autodidact. Yeah.
What I do with them is I spend most of my time unlearning.
Yes, all the stuff you've been crammed into your head, body, yeah.
I think that's what's important.
I think that's a lesson for humanity, perhaps. We
Indeed.
have to unlearn and unreify institutional structures that we've taken as being essential, because some of our scholars have told us this is what's really essential. This is the real truth. And there are no real truths. There's a synergistic kind of quality to the universe. And we may be able to lay us on with a tradition, with a way of being in universe that's transcended to what we've been through 200,000 years of human history, perhaps, if you can understand.
Yeah.
And that's something that is an opening upon that Fuller offers.
Yeah, I think we need to apply ignorance to this history and evolutionary process.
Mm-hmm.
Evolution is very subtle, and it's very hard to ferret out the qualities of evolution that are sort of just history, and the qualities for which there may be a mechanism. Is there a mechanism driving evolution?
Well, that's a big question. Or yeah, right. That's a thing that we're trying to understand, because we're getting closer and closer to understanding things in an intelligent way that we have not had any possibility of having coming out of history. It seems every day comes over the transom, some new breakthrough in every field, everywhere. We're coming to understand things more and more. It seems to me, it's a time. It's a very pregnant moment we live in.
A lot of those breakthroughs, though, are mistakes.
Yeah,
that
that's
in
true.
20 years we're going to find out. Well, something went wrong there.
Well,
So you don't want to just accept every new discovery. There's a lot of them are mistaken.
Yeah, like Crazy Eddie, I got a deal for you, and this is going to set you free, if you buy a Hostess cupcake or whatever. A lot of it has to do with selling stuff and making the old system work. A lot of it has to do with economics and politics. But anyway, back to this clip. You got the clip, and maybe they got to set it up. You could say set it up for us.
Yeah.
Because it'll help understand something about the synergetics or the geometry of synergetics.
I think the clip is from 2007.
Okay.
And we had this event at the Rhode Island School of Design, and we invited, as we often do, students to come up and show us what they've been doing. And the clip is Nick Tomlin sharing his work with us, and myself and Michael Burt and Peter Hubers help Nick come to understand the geometrical qualities of the work he's done.
And let's hope that we can transmit some of this to others who may be viewing, possibly. And was this part of the Synergetics Collaborative? Or?
Yes.
It was?
Yes,
okay,
this was our 2000, I'm pretty sure it was the 2007 work symposium at the Rhode Island School of Design in Providence, Rhode Island. 2008,
2007, who cares? As long as it's right, it's good, it's going to wear it. So maybe we can set that up now. We're talking with CJ Fearnley, and he's a major intellectual that you want to pay attention to. So maybe we can set that clip up now, Roberto, if you could, please.
My name is Nick Tomlin. I'm a sophomore in the Industrial Design Department here in RISD, and this is my third year living in Providence. Came over from England, and I don't know, just been getting, I'm 24 years old, I had a late start, I started getting into RISD with all kinds of funny ideas, but I've been feeling my way through, and what was wonderful about the foundation classes was they do a drawing class, a two-dimensional design class, and a three-dimensional design class, which are also very separate. And okay, is everything? Can we hear me? Oh, we got the feedback. Wow. Oh, great. This is great. Yeah. I'll just move into it. Force you to do this now. Okay, there's a chance here. But we had a class where we had to take a shape and repeat it. And I took a coat hanger and then found a way of doubling it with another coat hanger like that. So you've got this now. I'm doing this in the wrong order. You're supposed to save the best one for last. And that's what you get after you combine them. You get two halves which lock together, and they make a very sturdy spring. Take a lot there. I think you're all very familiar with this one. It's also the coat hangers. It's just the long side there, making up triangles. And then, I really don't know the names of any of these. I just learned that this is a tetrahedron.
Tetrahedron, yeah. It's got 4 triangular sides, and each facet is subdivided into thirds, right?
Right. It's the that's what and it seems to do it on its own. It's quite happy to do it without me having to interfere too much either, which is nice. Takes my kind of human error side out of it. This was one of the interesting ones because I was going for a cube, but then I gave up and then just pulled the edges together. And you were talking, CJ, about what this might. What's the name of this thing?
I'm seeing. It looks to me.
It's a saddle polyhedra.
Saddle polyhedra?
Saddle polyhedra. Yeah, with 3 quadrangles. 4. 3. It's a bipolar. You're right.
Yeah. Okay, so what they're saying is that this is a quadrangle.
Yeah.
Right.
And there's another one back here and another one on the bottom. So you've got 3 quadrangles.
Saddled
polyhedron.
Saddle polyhedron. Thank you. Okay.
The term is by Peter Pierce.
Yes. Do you know the name for this one? I'd like to know what this is called, but we can talk about it later. So that was last year.
A prism?
Is it? It's a lampshade or something. So now I'm in the industrial design department, and they make us go through learning materials bit by bit, and you learn steel through learning about wire first, and then sheet first, just sheets like paper, which you fold and do models with. So all that paper folding turns into folding sheet steel. And then you move on to wire, which you do independently. And I did this little, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to put down the mic. It's just 2 rings with 16 holes on each, and then there's 4 strands of piano wire that go loop round, next one loop round, and you get a set like that. They twist, and they twist, and so that's a nice shape on its own. It's quite bouncy. It runs around.
I guess I have a name for that one.
Peter, you can name this one.
No, right?
Name that polyhedra.
Well,
okay.
A compound of a 10-sided prism maybe, and it's reciprocal one.
The 10-sided prism's on the top.
Now this is the anti-prism.
The anti-prism, so these are triangles.
This one, no, I mean this. These are the triangles.
Okay.
The horizontal plane is missing. There should go a plane through these points as well, and through these points. And this is its reciprocal version of it. I've got a publication on that. If you want to have that, so give me the card, I can send it.
Yeah. Afterwards. Thank you. Okay. So what's funny? Okay, what's fun about this one though is that you can organize it thus, or if you bring all the rings around, and you can bring them out, and there's a spring in there. I'm sorry. Start off with this shape here, and you can bring it up and twists like that, but then you can arrange it round, so this also works like that, and there's a spring. There's the the tension inside the piano wire, which will direct things. And I have another piece which is actually in a gallery right now, and I can't get it out. It's behind the glass, and it's just 2 rings like this, but there's a beautiful field going on. You get the sense of just, there's a nice symmetry in it. This I'm just figuring things out and remembering shapes. So that's a little sort of sphere in 2 halves. Just wire, piano wire, and copper, well, metal ring, steel ring. And then this last one is an offshoot of this one here. And you have 2 rings and a single wire running through 4 holes on each. And it just has a lot of energy to it. You can twist it round. It starts off like this when it's open, but you can arrange it as such, like that. And you get all the wires twist around each other and make this sort of little node or pinch like that. So they're all investigations, and I'm just flying blind right now. But I think the last 3 days have been extremely useful to me personally. So thank you for that, because this is totally uninformed, and now I have some kind of system to fit it into. So it's very nice. Thank you for that. I've been aware of Buckminster Fuller since I was about 16 or 18 in a kind of far-off way, and I just had the feeling I had to be here. So, yeah, and I'm glad I came. I'm really glad. Thank you for all coming down here.
Thank you.
Okay, well, that's really interesting. It brings up the dimensions of synergetics and the way those manipulation of the tetrahedrons and so forth can be understood. And that all relates to the geometry of reality, no?
The geometry of thinking.
Of thinking even. Yeah,
yes.
okay, right. Okay, yeah, that's
and
interesting.
So my role there is as adjuvant.
Yeah.
I really like getting with our students at RISD and other participants at some of our other
I saw
events.
you holding that microphone to
Yeah.
get every last word. That was an adjuvant.
The students have an integrity and a serendipity and a spontaneity that needs to be cultivated and harnessed. We don't want to shut them up. We want to help them explore what they're doing and learn how the universe works so that they can go and design our future so that we can have a sustainable future for 100% of humanity without offense to anyone.
Including the ecology. Including
no ecological
that mission statement of the Buckminster Fuller Institute is magnificent. That was Bucky himself who came up with that. And he's somebody to which we could all repair, I think, and I think that's why I'm so happy to run into you at this recent event and so forth, and because we're both advocates of his way of thinking. So you got involved back to your story in a little sense. You say, we were talking off cue, that your dad was a mechanic, and you got some things that are like mechanic, like Fuller was a mechanic. He had a machinist card and everything.
Union card or something.
That helped get you on to him in terms of that. And then you went on and you did your degree at Binghamton in mathematics. You like mathematics. Huh?
Mathematics and philosophy. Yeah, I tend to be a detail-oriented person.
You are detail-oriented.
I lead these discussions in Philadelphia on various topics. Like I said, Sunday we'll be talking about ignorance. And I usually come in with like 3 pages of really tiny detailed notes, and I use that to spur the discussion.
I see, yeah.
I don't lecture. I didn't lecture at Providence.
No, you held the microphone to hear.
I'm a servant. I'm a servant to the geniuses that we bring in.
That's sort of like the media is that. A media is a way of transmitting the things from people. Go ahead, Yeah. But so that's something that you're given to and so forth, and you picked up on Fuller and you've been running with him ever since in that.
Yes.
And you're picking up others that nest with him well and so forth. Do you find anyone else that is as inspirational to you? I know you're off on a fellow named Arthur now. We could talk about a little later maybe. We're going to do a second program with you, but. Do you get into politics? Do you get into other things like the news or that kind of thing? Or do you sort of stick to Synergetics and Fuller and that kind of philosophy, you say, yeah?
Yeah, I try to keep away from the news. The news is our most polluted resource.
Okay.
So I, you know, if I read the New York Times headlines, I try not to read anything else.
I see. Just headlines, yeah.
And politics, I find politics, like Bucky found it destructive. And so I try to avoid politics, although you can't.
Yeah,
you know, because we have to make decisions in the world. Politics is the science of decision making, really.
Yeah,
we all make decisions in our personal lives.
It's also the science of the context within which decisions are made, which is something that isn't brought up nearly enough. I think we just take, for example, we just take as given certain issues, one of which is there'll never be, never can be, by the laws of all the laws of physics, enough for everybody. That's something that's assumed to be ipso facto absurd to consider anything other than scarcity as an ontologic reality.
Yes. Now, scarcity is one of those wonderful paradoxes, because on the one hand, Bucky is absolutely right, and I love that you keep emphasizing the importance of scarcity and the new ontological.
Something to be transcended.
Something to be transcended.
In real ontologic terms, reality, not just an idealistic thing.
But at the same time, our program here is only 1 hour.
Yeah,
we don't have an abundance of time.
Right.
And as much as you like, you can't run an automobile with 3 miles a gallon and not run out of oil. So you need to figure out how to come up with automobiles that run at 1,000 or 10,000 miles a gallon. We haven't done that yet.
That'd be called doing more with less. Yeah.
It would.
Through good design, yeah.
So scarcity is something that we think we have, but we really don't if we engage our design faculty. But if we fail to engage our design faculty, scarcity hits us.
Well, what about the proposition that yes, scarcity has been a reality throughout virtually all of the human experience? How would you measure? Fuller did that magnificent thing back in '52. I guess it was part of what was to become the design science decade and so forth. But he measured the percentage of the world population that could be seen to be a have in terms of our technological capability of providing life support. And he had it on a percentage of the world population. And coming out of history was flat in terms of 6th century. It took decades to invent a tack. Now every day there's thing coming every day. It's going exponential. It's developing exponentially. And the percentage of the world population that could be realistically seen at the level of capability, not the inherited reality, the reality institutionally ensconced or reified, but that the percentage of the world population at the level of capability was growing, and he felt that it reached a point of about 10%, coming hyperbolic out of history, by the First World War, 20% by the Second, and he projected 20 years to about 1970 from 1952. We're going to cross the 50% mark for the human society in terms of the percentage of the world population that had the capability of providing a lifestyle which could be called have. We haven't got a definition. What do we mean by have? How do we deal with surplus and so forth? But that's an interesting concept that he came up with, and one that gives a certain kind of reading to this idea that it's been scarcity, we're transcending that, and we're coming into a new kind of ontologic reality and universe, and that's never able to be mentioned. It's ipso facto absurd to say anything except there's not nearly enough. Everybody's starving, as you can all see, with the reified, outdated institutional assumptions.
But remember, Fuller said philosophy to be effective must be mechanically applied. So how do we mechanically apply this insight about scarcity to, say, a starving artist in Bushwick or in Fishtown in Philadelphia? How do they experience the abundance that we intellectuals think they're supposed to have?
I don't think it's fair to put that critique on it any more than the people at, where's that town down in Missouri now, where they just got a bad decision by a court system. Or it wasn't fair to put that down upon Spartacus, who said, or Jesus, who said, let's take care of the least among us. There wasn't the capability to do it in the way that is now emerging.
But Fuller talks about individual initiative.
True.
Ought not the individual have an access to this abundance?
Ought not every individual have access to this abundance that is now becoming available to all 100% of humanity plus the ecology?
So how
that we're coming to that moment now, never before in history. We got 200,000 years of our existence on this planet as a species. This is a unique moment, not the French Revolution or a moment of history or something like that, or a Democrat-Republican election or something.
So how can we help the individual achieve that abundance now?
Well, okay. Well, that's something that, not only that, but no, what you need to have is an overarching idea of what is the reality. Is it possible we're transcending material scarcity? That would undercut virtually the assumptions of all of our inherited institutions.
But even if we are overcoming
at
scarcity,
the level, it's not the level of reality. It's not the reality. The reality is one that we're dragging history, and it's our reified institutions that we have to deal with. We got all these reified, we got slavery. We're just 100 years out of chattel slavery. We have all these outdated institutions that were all formulated when there's not nearly enough for one to win, somebody else had to lose, reified by military power. Creation stories, PR campaigns by people who set themselves up as having the authority for it's right for us to have a lot and for them not to.
So are you suggesting that it's like a semantic reaction, as in Krzyzewski's work, where we're just sort of speaking the past scarcity and creating a reality that burdens us with a scarcity because of the semantic patterns?
I drove out to a friend of mine's out in Brooklyn the other day, and we were driving, and we just looked out, and there's all these buildings everywhere. And it just amazed me. Every brick had to be laid by somebody. Everything had to be built. All of the institutions, I mean the structures, the architectural structures, all of the institutions, the invisible structures of the system by which we operate politically and economically and the thinking, it's all been predicated upon a particular situation that was characteristic at the level of capability. You have to make a distinction between capability and then you've got all of the inherited institutions that have to somehow, in a realistic way, to keep track with what Fuller says 100%, you can't just overthrow people in a revolutionary sense if you're thinking design, something that include everybody, that the capability did not exist. If part of being able to, the capability of part of having a have way of living is that, let's just say out of the dark, that in 3 hours you can fly to California. You couldn't do that in 1900. You couldn't do it in 1915. You couldn't do it. There is a building up of the capability, and we're making progress on the percentage of the world population that can be seen to be a have. We don't even have a definition. How do we define a have? We don't have it. We don't even bring it up because it's just thought ipso facto absurd. There never can be. One thing's certain, everything is limited. It's a limited capability that we have. We can't have the theme of Mr. Fuller saying 100% of humanity, including the ecology and everybody, with nobody left behind, is such an oversweeping kind of thing. It's not been possible any time in history until perhaps our lifetime. Is it possible to think that could be the moment in which we're born? After 10,000 generations?
Yeah, I think that's the wrong lesson from Fuller.
Fine.
I think the lesson from Fuller should be that there's a final exam for every generation.
Spell it out.
I think that as we learn more, Eric Severeid had a remarkable quip. The major cause of problems is solutions.
That's funny.
So
yeah.
as your generation solves the problems set for you by universe, by history, you pass to my generation a world that has the problems that are the results of your solutions.
Yeah.
Every generation does that to the next generation.
And how many generations have there been?
And what we should do, I think, is thank the prior generation. Thank you for doing the hard work of solving yesterday's problems and presenting me with the much more difficult problems of today. And I think we should rejoice in how successful the prior generation has been. Too many people in the environmental movement, to my taste.
Yeah, go ahead, talk. It's a big issue now, isn't it, with global warming and all.
They are so upset at the prior generations failing to solve all the problems.
Right.
But as in my reading of Fuller,
good.
The reality is that every generation succeeds in solving the most critical problems
of the moment,
or else we'd be extinct, right?
Well, that's another thing we could bring up. Yeah.
You solve the problems in your generations, and the natural consequence, of course, is that my generation has to solve bigger, harder problems, and it's unfortunate that too many of us blame those who came before. If we only realized the terrible situation that your generation had been born into.
Not to mention the generations a couple hundred years back.
And how much success you've done in bringing society forward.
Yeah.
So the way I interpret Fuller's final exam is that every generation is got a final exam. Any generation that fails to pass their final exam, that's it.
Okay.
We don't go further. But if you pass your final exam, what you're going to do is you're going to saddle your children with harder problems than you ever faced before. And that's the joy and wonder of modern civilization.
Okay, well, that's a good way to think and everything like that. I wonder, though, about that, because like we talked about tensegrity, and we talked about the time. And Daedalus, was it Joyce or something? That Daedalus say history is a nightmare from which we're attempting to awaken. In a certain sense, that makes sense. We've never had really universal justice. It's always been, since civilization, Nebuchadnezzar, pharaohs, the Greek, even Athens, even Periclean Athens was based on a slave system. Yes, slavery made it possible for some to live well. And so that's the thing that they could do. Then they had the hereditary families in Europe. Everybody else was wallowing around in the mud. You didn't have anything like justice that could have been realized then if there was some distribution. But you had to have the accumulation of capital to be able to have investment made, and then capitalism comes and so forth. And then if you have that possibility, if you're thinking about transcending scarcity, that's something you can't even hardly say. You just can't even say it hardly at all. But transcending material, not just spiritual or ideological or idealistic thinking, but you can't say it except as being ipso facto absurd. And it depends. But on the side of that's positive. That view that we may be transcending and coming into a new relationship in the universe in this moment, this 10,000th generation that's coming into their own now, and that. But on the left, on the side of the possibility of them failing, as you said, failing now means, and this is something else that I think Mr. Fuller was very aware of, and everything. The means by which political legitimacy was established throughout all of human history was whoever had the biggest club hit the other on the head and conquered. The first law of international law is the right to conquer. You can conquer people, enslave them, and all of that, and you can do that. Then you have armies to support that, and then you have creation stories to give your view of political legitimacy leeway, then PR to build that up. That's how political legitimacy was established, and now that still holds in terms of the international order. And that's based essentially upon military power to conquer. And that's been the history of the universe. And that's now reached a point where the weapon systems that exist, they exist in reality. They exist. And they've not been used. But the weapon systems are such, according to the modeling, that after First World War, Second World War, we get gas, we get this. We've now got weapon systems that if they're to be unleashed in a spasm of hatred about one saying they're better than the other and fighting over the scarce and all of that kind of thing, if they're to be unleashed, it would mean the end of the Homo sapiens species. Do you think that's true? That destructive capability is building to a point where it's something new in terms of the destructive capability of bad decision making and reifying and outdated institutions that have to be, cannot face the question of changing and becoming into a new way.
Well,
does that make it new?
Certainly the destructiveness of modern weapon system has exceeded prior generations.
Qualitatively different.
Yeah.
When you can wipe out the whole, you can stop evolution of consciousness, including the Homo sapien. That's never been, that's new. What I'm looking for is something new.
So there are now certain individuals who, if they have a bad day, they have a brain cancer, and suddenly the wiring says, let me push this button, even though maybe they wouldn't have thought that 5 years ago.
No, they wouldn't have had the ability. We were impotent at the level of species.
Yeah.
So we're at what we're trying to get to is, this is not your normal time. This is not like the French Revolution, or the Republican election of 2005, or something like that. This is not your normal time. This is an unusually significant moment in the evolution of universal consciousness.
Yeah, but I worry that that's disempowering.
Okay,
I'm
maybe.
worried
Yeah, I understand.
That if I focus too much on that, I'll just throw
on
up
what?
my
The
hand.
destructive?
On the destructiveness,
and
not just the weapons, but ecologically, we have achieved both population levels and earth-moving capabilities, and what we're doing to the nitrogen cycle has me as worried as what we're doing to the carbon cycle.
It's a very real thing. Yeah.
So there are some significant existential threats.
Thank you.
That we never had before.
Well, okay, that global warming is certainly one of them. That's what that reward that they went to the Buckminster Fuller Challenge now is addressing that. And it's very much of a politically. It's just they had 400,000 people on the streets of Manhattan the other day about global warming, and people are really cotton on to that. Yeah. But it's a capability. Those weapons are a capability. They're not unleashed. We have a capability to liberate the human society with the advancement of our technological system to where there is enough for all to be haves, including the ecology, in a way that is equally significant, existentially significant in a positive format. As to the weapon systems, there's a balance between the destructiveness and the positiveness so that we can get a hold of something to get over the idea there's not nearly enough, there is enough for all. And that's something that can't be mentioned by anybody in a political condition because they're too busy lining the pockets of those, as historically has been the case throughout all of human history.
But for each person who's facing these challenges, the question comes mechanically, what do I do?
Yeah.
Bucky says philosophy to be effective must be mechanically applied.
How do we
that's right. Mechanically apply this knowledge? I think one of the things is we have a crisis of ignorance. Bucky said that.
Yeah, right? He did. Yeah, absolutely.
There's a crisis of ignorance. So that's one of the reasons I've been very much partaking personally to learn from free online courses to try to get the understanding to see how we might change things.
Yeah, right.
And what needs to be changed.
Yeah, right.
I mean,
virtually everything.
Almost, yeah. So where do you start?
Yeah, right.
So I wonder if some of our most cherished thoughts could be part of the problem.
Oh, well, they could be also part of something to be reified. There's a lot of things there. I wonder then in that vein, we only got a few minutes. We're going to do another hour with you after this, and we'll get down to some of those questions of politics and that. But you've been involved with the Linux, and you're involved with the information technology and the thing, and that's open source. And that's a thing of how we're going to use the internet, which is an amazing thing, and all of the capability that involves. Those educational autodidactic courses that are becoming available are really valuable. So why don't you talk about that, because you've been involved in that from the very early stages, and what the advantages of Linux or the open source, and what are the issues that are involved in terms of the internet and it's being able to be made available to the maximum benefit of humanity and the ecology.
Yeah, I think one of the great things about Linux and free and open source software in general is the ability to share it.
Okay.
There are certain software, and I won't mention any names, that you're not allowed to share with your friends. With Linux, if you want it, I can get it for you, and I don't have to pay anyone, and you don't have to pay anyone, and so it's a freedom of sharing. And
sharing, yeah. Okay,
Bucky talked about sharing and the education, learning, and you need to share in order to learn and grow. I think conversation and sharing is so important to culture. And so I really like Linux. Linux is now the world's most popular operating system.
Okay, now talk about it a little bit. Do I associate with Sweden or something, or it got started there? Or what is the history? It's been around a long time, and it's very important that we understand that and back up that movement, right?
Linus Torvalds started Linux in 1991. I got involved in 1993. I'm not much of a developer. I was more interested in using it and managing it, and so I've done a lot of systems administration with Linux.
Good.
And it's important to have an alternative to other more popular, formerly more popular systems. Yes. Now with Android and all, Linux has become Android is based on Linux.
Is it really?
Yeah.
It is. Okay.
So as a result of the Android movement, Linux is now the most common operating system out there.
It is of all
because
particularly with the new social media or with the new Facebook. Is it relating to Facebook or not?
I think. Probably Facebook uses Linux.
And Twitter and YouTube?
Yeah. YouTube is Google, which is Linux based, I'm pretty sure.
It is? Yeah, okay.
I don't work there.
Yeah,
but I understand that much of their infrastructure is Linux. So on the server side, you have a lot of Linux.
Yeah.
But on the cell phone side, you're getting a lot of Linux. On the tablet side, you're getting a lot of Linux. So a lot of people have Linux. They don't even realize they have it. So it's a very important system. It's growing. One of the miracles of Linux is the speed with which it's developing. There are more lines of code added to the Linux kernel each hour than any other software any human has ever.
That's encouraging that that's the case, in your view?
Yeah, because it means...
It's moving that way, away from the privatization or private... profit making? Is there a connection there at that term in terms of economic
profit gets complicated.
Yeah, it
in order for markets to work, you have to have a base of standards.
Yeah.
And Linux provides that standards base.
Okay.
And with that standards base, it makes it possible for IBM makes a lot of their money off of Linux.
Okay, well, we got to that point, and I think we're going to have to close this off now as we can. We're talking with CJ Fearnley, and he's really got an awful lot. We've been talking about this. We're going to go on and talk to another program and get around to some of these questions of politics and that. But thank you very much for such a very, 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 very well-led life that I congratulate you on. And we invite you to stay tuned. We'll be coming up more with him in a separate program. So, CJ, thanks a lot very much for coming in. We just got started. Thank you for viewing. There'll be another addition to this program following in a day after this one is aired. Okay, thank you for viewing. Okay, so
there's an N missing. It's Fearnley.
No wonder. That's why I was having a hard time with it. Now let me just make sure that they're okay.